My name is Julian Scott. I'm a consultant to Film London, the capital screen agency, where my consultancy role is to take the lead on animation for the organisation. If you don't know Film London, the elevator pitch is that we support talent, develop creativity and promote London as a global production hub in film, television, animation, games and beyond. In my own area of animation, we recently developed and released an animation strategy for London, of which a significant segment is devoted to disability. So hiring people you've worked with in the past is safe, it's quick and it's easy. Familiarity comes at the cost of uniformity, however. So how can you create fresh, innovative, standout animation if you're always hiring the same people? Different people will have different skills with different insights and ideas. They'll have different life experiences and different perspectives. They'll tell different stories and make different shows. And some of those people are different because they're disabled. Disability is at the forefront of discussion within the industry at the moment. Screen Skills are conducting research in a research program called Accessibility in Animation, which I've been privileged to see, but as the report isn't published yet, I can only discuss in broad terms. In those broad terms, just over half of the industry think the animation sector is a good industry for disabled people to work in. That said, the majority think disability cannot be openly discussed. Almost 3/4 think there is discrimination against disabled people, and 80% of the respondents thought there could be more done to accommodate disabled people. To discuss the topic with me, I have 4 people, each with a different but nonetheless important perspective or entry point into the debate. Because one of our contributors is blind and I have no idea if any of the audience are visually impaired, I'm going to ask each panelist to quickly say hello after I've introduced them, so you can match the voice to the person. We also have closed captions operating, which should allow anyone with a hearing impairment to follow the discussion. And as we have 2 panelists with the same forename, I may have to revert to using surnames as well as forenames from time to time. To the panel. Firstly, our first of our Rebeccas, Rebecca Baker. Rebecca Baker runs the Equal Access Network Department of Film London, with a core mission to support accessibility and diversity within the film and television industry here in London. The Equal Access Network supports almost 3,000 diverse and talented members, ranging from new entry to highly skilled, in addition to managing several initiatives to train, support and advance diversity and inclusion. How are you doing, Rebecca?
I'm good, thank you. Happy to be here. A very important topic of discussion, so thank you.
Excellent. Next, we have Rick Williams. Rick is the Chief Executive Officer of Freeney Williams Limited, which is Europe's leading specialist disability consultancy, providing strategic advice and guidance on employing disabled people and ensuring their access to goods and services. He's a Chartered Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, an Associate of both the Business Disability International and the Business Disability Forum, as well as being a Non-Executive Director of Ofcom. Rick, where are you zooming from today?
I'm on the south coast in Brighton, Julian, and I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you, sir. Next, Rebecca Tu, or Rebecca Gill, an award-winning producer who develops, finances and produces live action and animated content. Living with invisible disabilities, ME, lupus and fibromyalgia, Rebecca has faced many discriminative barriers and challenges during her career. Her perseverance in pursuing her dreams has pushed Rebecca forward and established her passion for creating diverse and exclusive content, as well as advocating for equality within the workplace. She is now an animation producer at Perpetual Art Studios, where the mission is to create content that represents the underrepresented. She also develops magic in film and TV by working as a VFX production coordinator at Cinesight. Hello, Rebecca number 2.
Hello, thank you for having me. Really happy to be here.
And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Shaheen. Is it Schleifer, Shaheen?
Schleifer it is.
I got it right. I'm quite impressed with myself for that. Shaheen's a post-production supervisor who's been engaging disabled staff for the last 3 years, basically from the first time she was a post-production coordinator. So my final scene setter or pre-title sequence before we start chatting. One of my colleagues at Film London attended a session yesterday about disability in the screen industries generally. It wasn't just about animation. The big takeaway from that session was that the Creative Diversity Network was tasked back in 2017 and took on the commitment to double the percentage of disabled people in off-screen roles from 4.5% to 9.5% by 2020. So what do you think that percentage increase was by 2020? Despite their best efforts, they only managed a 0.9% increase, under 1% increase. And based on that slow rate, it would take until 2041 to reach that 20% increase. Rick, if I can start with you, why do you think that might be?
Interesting question. And there's no easy answer to that. But the first thing I would do is say, it's a very interesting target that's been set, and it's incredibly ambitious. What we know from our research is that organizations typically employ far more disabled people than they know about. So how you count disability, what you mean by disability, will affect all of this. What that stat says is 4.9% of people have told us they have a disability, which is a very different issue. The other point is that this is often about what do people mean by disability, and the images and the attitudes and all of that actually springs to mind. And I think a lot of this is going to be about barriers and issues that people face when actually applying for a job. And the last point I would make just here, Julian, is that I think it's kind of important that organizations think about, what do we do if we're actually serious about this? What we typically do is spend a lot of time and effort getting disabled people ready to apply for jobs, and not enough time getting employers to think about, what do we need to do differently to attract people? You don't attract disabled people by doing what you've always done, but a bit harder. You have to think a bit more differently.
Thanks, Rick. And Rebecca, Gill, if I can come to you on the back of that. I mean, as somebody who works in the industry with disability, Rick mentioned the barriers to attracting people into the industry. What have you come across as barriers personally in your journey?
I think just the sort of like a lack of options really that employers have given in the past. I think especially before coronavirus, that it was a lot more difficult, I thought, to get into the industry then, because companies weren't as accommodating. Used to ask if there would be a chance to work from home, and that for a lot of companies was a big no-no. Or people with disabilities have sometimes like quite a few hospital appointments and stuff, and sometimes asking, oh, would it be okay if I just had this Thursday morning off to go to my appointment? And they would see you as a liability, or that you weren't reliable because you couldn't be in for half a day 1 week. Whereas now, I suppose, now that we're all working from home still, it's more accessible. But I think the worry is that it could go back to what it was like before. I think that's a big issue and a big concern for a lot of disabled people in the industry at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And Shaheen, you say, in the last 3 years, you've been employing people with disability in your businesses. But from our sort of preliminary conversations before we started the panel today, you gave me the impression that you don't see any barriers. You just get on with it.
I think, yes, I just want to put out, it's the last 3 years that I've been consciously hiring. And before I worked in production and development, I did hire people, but it wasn't like a conscious decision. It just people, if they applied, they had the skills. That's how I viewed it. The reason why I don't see it as a particular barrier is that I faced a similar kind of prejudice a long time ago. And it was ongoing for a while. People think that if you're working class, or if you're Asian, and even longer than that, further back than that, if you were female, people would ask questions: are they qualified? Can they do the job? How would they fit in? All of these same kind of questions I hear are being asked about disabled people. So I don't see it as any different an issue to that. And the answers to those questions are, you ask people, you ask people what experience they have. That helps you place them. That doesn't mean you dismiss them. It helps you tell you where you need to place them, whether you need to give training, but also what you need to do in order to help people get that job, to do that job as part of the team and to be able to deliver. Everybody doesn't work in the same way. Like, you might have a disabled person who can take Thursday off and will still be able to manage the work that's been allocated to them. And I think it's the way we look at the job as a whole needs to kind of shift, rather than just thinking of the problems that are involved with that person.
Okay, thank you. And Rebecca Baker, you've been placing people in roles for quite some time through Film London. You've got, I think it's more than 3,000 people now registered on the EAN. Two questions, I think. Firstly, what proportion of the people that you have registered have or come forward with a disability, admit to having a disability, if you like, or state that they do? And then second question is, of the employers, the studios, the networks, and et cetera, people that you work with, have you ever come, or do you come across situations when you say, and I should let you know that this particular person who we're putting up for this particular role, has mobility issues, they're a wheelchair user, and then have you ever come across anybody saying, oh, I don't know if we can really cope with that?
Yeah, well, let me answer your first question. I think I started with Equal Access Network 2.5 years ago, and I think stats are very important to us because we report back on our targets. Our goal when we started 6 years ago was to try to make the film and TV industry more fairly reflect the population of London, and examining reasons why maybe the women's stats, maybe diversity stats or disability stats don't match the population. And the original stat of 4% that I was given when we started with the Equal Access Network has doubled. And I think it's just because we're asking different questions when people join the Equal Access Network now. I think, like Rebecca said, and we've all been saying, what is our definition of disability? So instead of making it a very narrow definition, allowing people when they register to share with us what their access issues are, or if they feel that they have a visible or invisible disability, has enlightened us to the fact that our members are dealing with much more than we anticipated. And now we just have to find solutions that work for them. You asked us about the employers that come to us.
Yeah.
I think everyone has been saying for as long as I can remember, it's a priority to be accessible to disabled workforce. I think as a devil's advocate, looking why maybe those numbers didn't improve more since 2017 in the survey that you cited, I think there have been a lot of other priorities that might have usurped our attention over the last 3 years. So COVID, sustainability, and diversity targets have become real talking points with a lot of our clients. And so we're still working to keep socioeconomic, disability, and female-male ratios in the conversation consistently. And I think now is really the moment, because I think, like Rebecca said, the industry's changing. COVID and lockdown took the industry that we know and it flipped it on its head. So we've had to reinvent how people work, and accessibility, working remotely, are now all negotiable factors that we bring into the conversation when our employers are looking to recruit. So I'm optimistic that we can keep having this conversation more than we used to.
Thank you. And I mean, I suppose that's sort of a follow-up thought I have to that is, when you say it's becoming more, people are more focused on it, it's becoming more initiatives, that, there's a big push for it. Rick, I guess I'll come back to you on this one, if I may. Do you think there's a danger of employers just sort of box ticking, or do you think there could be a genuine shift into people saying, okay, let's open up our eyes to some more people that we could employ from different areas, and some of those people might be disabled? Is it box ticking, or is it a genuine desire to employ a more diverse group of people?
It's an interesting question. What you find is these things tend to be a bit cyclical. And disability was all the rage a few years ago, and then other things come along. I think if people are serious about disability, they need to think about two things. The first thing is the process and the procedures they use to recruit, because they will present a whole series of barriers. But the other barrier is attitudinal. And I don't even mean that in a judgmental sense. I mean that people make stereotype judgments about disability and all sorts of things. So let me do a bit of audience participation without expecting any answers. If I say the word to you, disabled people or disabled person, what image pops into most people's heads? The answer is usually wheelchair user and guide dog user. And I will guarantee that a lot of the people listening to us today will think that. That isn't what disability is. So people have attitudes that are traditional, based around medical conditions and stuff like that. So some of the work and effort needs to be on getting people to come at this from a different understanding and perspective, because that's where the barriers are.
Okay, when you say different perspectives, what do you know? Could you define that?
Well, yeah, I mean, what most people still do, and this isn't a judgment, it's just the way we are, is that we make judgments about disability based on the medical model. So It's not unusual for people to say, well, what do I need to do for a blind person? Or what do I need to do for a wheelchair user? Or what do I need to do with someone with this condition? And our standard is, I don't know. Show us the person, show us the job. What is the issue? Just because people share a condition doesn't mean to say they share competencies, incompetencies, or anything else. So it's about thinking about individuality, taking it as an individual issue and addressing the barriers that get in the way of that. Don't think about the condition, think about the effect of the condition is the touchstone here.
And Shaheen, you said earlier on, that's exactly your approach. You don't think about the condition. You just think, you know, how can I've got this person in front of me. They're qualified. They seem to be talented. They seem to be, you know, they'll fit in with the team. And you just go for it from there.
Yes, I think that if you, I understand Rick's point about the medical model. It is a very limited way of looking at people, especially because when you're interacting with a medical model with hospital and stuff, it's always at the point where you need help that, you know, an institution, medical institution is to give you. That's not anything to do with us. When people are approaching us, they're not usually at that stage, but you have to also discuss these kinds of things with them just in case in the future that is a problem. But the point is, right from the start when you approach them, I think that you need to ask the people what help they need, when they're going to need it, any special arrangements that need to be made, because they are putting themselves forward for work. They know that they are capable of work. It's us that don't know what we can do to help them. They usually know. So if you ask them what support they need, is it technical support? Is it time? Is it to do with travel? All of these kinds of things. In a way, you know, we have expectations of when we hire anybody that things might not work out, but we don't not hire, forgive me for using the horrible phrase, able-bodied people, but we don't say we don't think, well, that might not work out with that person, so we won't employ them at all. So, and you should kind of have the same attitude when you're employing anybody, including disabled people. They're presenting for a job. Let's ask them. They can cooperate and help develop a plan that will help them go through this. And that plan may change, you know, every work environment is a little different, every team is a little different. So you do have to go back to it and get them to contribute and change and alter things. So I think it's just an evolving process. There's like no kind of, I haven't found anything else out there. So I've just kind of worked with Rebecca to kind of come up with this kind of process, just a sort of continual assistance program, I suppose you could call it.
Okay, thank you. Rick, I'll come back to you quickly on that, because Shaheen mentioned something, you know, she used that phrase, you know, the horrible word able-bodied. And, you know, the Screen Skills research is showing that there's quite a large proportion of people who don't think that they're comfortable in discussing disability. You know, as somebody with visual impairment yourself, do you, are there words that shouldn't be used, can be used? I mean, are there trigger words, or do people take it all a bit too seriously?
Yeah, it's a very individual viewpoint on this. Actually, I don't care. And a lot of disabled people don't. What they're more concerned about is the intent of the use of the language. So there are some words clearly that you just would not use in today's society. But mostly people are more concerned about the intention than they are about the actual language. Some people, they have a viewpoint and it's a life view for them, and they are. It is an issue, but we would say, look, let's not get too bogged down with this stuff. It's not that important. What's really important is the conversation and try and get a positive outcome. Let's not get too bogged down to stop people having the conversation.
Okay, Rebecca Baker, do you find people when they're coming to you, they're quite prepared to discuss? Do they come to you and say, I'm looking for work, I'm re-entering the workplace after some time out, or something's happened to me, I'm coming back into the workplace, I want to register. How far down the list of sort of points that they raise is if they have a disability or not, generally?
Well, I think we're trying to create, sorry, I'll answer your question, but we're trying to create pathways with people who identify with disabilities can get back into the workforce. And I think, so Shaheen and I have created one of those. And I think, how could we replicate that or encourage other people to do that? And I think why it worked for us at the Equal Access Network is actually we had programs that were fully funded either by Screen Skills or the GLA that were set up to do just that. So the funding was there. The agenda was to get return to work candidates who were either parents or carers or returning to the industry after a gap. So what we found, we've run this 3 years in a row. And what we found is individuals with disabilities were coming forward for this program, whereas we thought originally it was going to be all parents that we were retraining and putting into work. There's a lot of individuals that either had an injury or an illness, whether it was ongoing or they were recovering. And so they were using this program to re-engage. So that taught me something, and it allowed me to connect with Shaheen, who was completely open-minded. Once she employed 3 individuals from the program, I went back to her with more. So I think we're unique in the sense that these conversations go on at the very start when people nominate themselves for a program because they want to participate in something that's targeted at them. So yes, obviously that conversation has to take place early on, and then you can create solutions. So I think if it's not an open conversation for employers and employees at the beginning, then how can you create a pathway, really?
Sure. And I should just quickly say to the people watching, there is an ability to, if you've got any questions for the panel, do put them into the chat. Claude, who's working feverishly in the background there, will be able to put them to me. I'll be able to feed them through to the panel. So very happy to receive your questions and thoughts. Rebecca Gill, you've been through good and less good experiences when looking for jobs and working with companies. Is there something where, let's say you're looking through job adverts, you've gone online, you're looking for things, the things that would make you feel comfortable that a company would accept your situation and help find sort of reasonable adjustments in order for you to give your best work, and things that might put you off?
Oh, so straight up from the job advert, I think it's always nice to see when that little line is sort of added at the bottom that they're like an equal opportunities company and stuff like that they're happy to hire people from different backgrounds, including disabilities and stuff. That's always sort of a go-to look for me, because I know at least the company is looking for potentially a disabled candidate and someone like me. But I think you don't really find out until you're sort of in the interview when you're having a chat with someone. I feel a lot of it is sort of that face-to-face contact, and you know straight away. Everyone gets that feeling when they meet someone for the first time. Yeah, we're going to get on. It's going to be a nice, easy conversation, and I feel like I can be open and talk to you about my disability, and that's always nice. But sometimes you don't get that, and then it's a little bit awkward. And then if you feel like you want to bring your disability up, sometimes the questions they ask aren't maybe exactly right. Like, I've been in situations in the past before where I've had a really good interview and they've asked me, okay, what is it that we can do to help with your disability? Everyone's unique with a disability. Just because maybe they already have someone that's hired that has the same conditions as me doesn't mean that our accessibility adjustments will be the same, because we're all different. And that was lovely. That was so nice and actually so refreshing to go to an interview and actually have someone ask me how they can help. But also at the same time, I've gone to interviews disclosed, and then they've sort of been put off straight away, or they've been like, oh yeah, but are you medicated? How much is that going to actually affect your job? And then it gets really awkward. And then I just sort of want to leave, because I think if they're going to treat me like that with an interview, what's the point of putting all my hard-earned time and effort wanting to work for a company that isn't even going to support me?
And do you think some of that's is like the phrasing or the intonation of the question and the words used? Because I suppose asking somebody, you know, going back to that question I sort of asked Rick a little while ago about sort of words that you should and shouldn't use and things that you should and shouldn't say. But as an employer, you might need to know how that might impact your work. So is it a question of sort of, I suppose, being asked nicely and constructively, or feeling that you're being sort of put on the spot and quizzed and they're trying to find a way to maybe not take you to the next stage of the interview process? Does that make a difference?
I think so, yeah. I think what Rick said, like there's definitely certain words and phrases that you don't use in this day and age and stuff like that. And you know, I think it is like an attitudinal thing too, really. Like a lot of people when interviewing do go off the medical model of what disability looks like. So I think if they're asking me, generally wanting to understand how they can help me better as an employer, and so that I can be open to them, I'm always really happy to discuss and have a chat and inform people about my disability and what can be done to help. But you can usually tell when they come in and they start asking you like, oh yeah, but are you medicated? How many days off a week do you usually have because you're disabled? How many sick days did you have at your last company? And you're there like, this isn't a question you should be asking me.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, so there's definitely some.
And Rick, in the sort of the legal aspects to that, you know, I suppose we're all fairly familiar with the kind of questions, you know, you can't ask women when you're interviewing them about their plans to have a family and this, that, and the other. But are there any sort of legal areas that you can't stray into, like the questions that Rebecca was saying that she'd been asked, like, you know, how many sick days did you have last year? You know, what's the chance of you not turning up for work because, you know, something's happened?
Yeah, there are any. I mean, the law around this stuff is quite messy, frankly. And yes, there are questions that you are not supposed to ask. Now, I can't say that the law is right necessarily. That's just the way it's written. So you're not really supposed to talk about how someone's disability will affect their ability to do the job unless it's a really directly related health and safety type issue. And then you make job offers subject to adjustments and stuff. So it's messy. We would say, look, don't get too uptight about this, but you need to be careful about making judgments on things that aren't relevant. And that's why they try and discourage those sort of conversations. So it's more talking about what the outputs of the job are and how you're going to achieve them. And what do we do differently? So that you're having a much more positive conversation. Remember, you're not, you know, people don't have to employ someone just because they have a disability. They may have a disability, but they're still employed to do a job. It's how they achieve the outputs is the conversation. What do we do differently? How do we do this for you? Is a much more positive conversation than what's wrong with you and how's it going to be bad for the job.
Okay. And Shaheen, you know, when you've been employing people, what sort of reasonable adjustments have you found yourself making in order to accommodate people?
There can be, well, I've had quite a variety actually. It can be from the type of furniture that you're providing people. It could be digital accessibility features. But I would say it's a case-by-case basis. It's not like one size fits all. I'll give you an example of one where I worked on with Rebecca. We were in COVID and there was a lot of remote working, and there were 3 people who had they all knew each other had a disability, and they had a little disability WhatsApp group to support each other. And they all had different disabilities, and they couldn't work like a full week. A single person could work a full week. So we made them all a job share. And fortunately, they all had like different times of the day when they preferred working. And because they always started the top of the day with a little support group and a little chat between themselves, they were able to I would give them work and they were able to divide it up between them about what they were going to do. And it was actually a really wonderful way of working. So again, right from the start, I let them lead me, tell me how they would see the job going. And as part of that discussion, that's how this job share came up. And it was so effective that I took them from a feature film to then to a big name director TV series, and then a feature documentary as well. So I employed them after the scheme as a proper employee. And they are credited on productions as well. So that worked out really nicely. And I met actually one of those women for the first time 2 nights ago at a screening, and she was saying that how much it gave her just to know that her she was able to do this work, which a lot of people in the industry, this particular kind of post-production work is quite specialist, and that a lot of people in the industry can't do it. And she was really glad to find out for herself that she could come up with her own solutions to doing things. So yeah, that was a really nice encouragement. But that's a kind of an example.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, one of the other things that Screen Skills asked in their research was about pay gap. Rebecca B, if I could ask you, I mean, have you ever come across this in working with people and placing people, that there's any hint or any overt desire to pay people less if they're disabled, or does that ever come up in conversation? Have you ever come across it?
Well, I'd be interested to hear Rick and Rebecca's opinion on that as well. But I mean, that's obviously research that we need to do. So I know what we've done up till now is requiring all our employers we encourage them to pay fairly and also to match the London living wage as opposed to just the minimum wage. But I haven't done any research myself on how individuals with disabilities feel, whether they're compensated fairly.
I suppose anecdotally, then, it would sound like that hasn't necessarily been an issue as far as you're concerned.
I must say, though, in the situation with Shaheen, and again, it's about having conversations and safe spaces for people to feel like they can disclose this with you, because when we started out, the program was very rigid. It was supposed to be, again, this is the return program. Mm-hmm. So the individuals with disabilities that were selected for the program, they knew they were supposed to work X amount of days, X amount of rates, and invoice. And they didn't fit that model because some of them could only work part-time. Some of them were limited the hours that they could do for disability allowance. And if they went in excess of that, they could lose their disability allowance. So they were like, well, how about I just work for free and don't get paid and learn how to do the job? And we were like, no, that's not. We can bend the program. We can adapt the program so that you're getting the full compensation that you were intended with the program, but we have to change the schedule. We have to do part-time hours, do twice as many weeks, half as many hours every week. So I think it's trying to ingrain a sense of fairness with everyone that we relate to, and sort of pushing that focus into the model of the program that we're doing, rather than trying to make the individual adapt to the program.
Mm-hmm. Okay, again, Rebecca, have you ever been in a situation where you felt maybe somebody was trying to shortchange you a little bit?
I don't think for my disability, no, and especially not in the last 2 years. I think like the pay gaps and everything have sort of been definitely a lot better than what they used to be, and I've not dealt with that myself. I think I've had experiences in the past, like way over 2 or 3 years ago now, where there's been a pay gap because of gender, but mm-hmm. I've never experienced it myself personally because of disability.
Okay. And Rick, I'm sure there must be reams of legislation which is supposed to sort of stop this kind of thing happening.
Yeah, well, as you would expect. There was a government minister 3 years ago who said, well, why don't we just pay disabled people less?
Really?
He had to apologise because he got a good kicking in the press for it. But if you start from that viewpoint, I think what you're looking at is disability in employment as an issue, a problem, not as good as. And that attitude still exists. But actually what we're talking about here today is a different attitude, one of how do we make this work? Why do we want to make it work? And what are the issues to make it all sort of fit together better? With that attitude, pay, no, it's not an issue, but I can't pretend it isn't an issue, because it is. It's pretty hidden, as it would be with all of the other ones. Mm-hmm. But I think the interesting thing was that this very senior member of the government thought it was an okay thing to say. that's quite an interesting reflection on some of the attitudes that people have.
Okay, and are there, I mean, if people, people with mobility issues might be put off going to work in a city and things like that, are there sort of benefits and financial support available from various government agencies in order to help them?
Yes, the main one's called Access to Work. It's funded through Job Centre Plus, and that's where that agency will pay for or contribute to, depending on the nature of the organisation, adjustments that cost money. They're particularly useful for support workers, taxis to work, those sorts of things. They will pick up the costs. It's one of the government's best hidden secrets. It's a very good one. It's an astonishing scheme. And what they've worked out is that every £1 that Access to Work spend on paying for adjustments, the Exchequer get £1.48 back. So, I think that tells you something quite a lot about the business case as well. But yes, those funds are available. It's a question of tapping into them. Okay.
So it's clearly, as you just said, Rick, looking at this from a sort of a positive, sort of why wouldn't we, as opposed to why would we employ more disabled people? We've covered the recruitment issues, reaching out to, finding ways to reach out to people with disabilities, making your job adverts a little more attractive to them, not to put them off. We've talked about the interview process. We've talked about reasonable adjustments that employers can make in order to allow people with disability to come and work and give their best and everything else. And we've also discussed the sort of the creative benefits of having part of your workforce from a disabled sector. Talking about sort of reasonable adjustments, I'm trying not to put up barriers, but I'm asking questions that are probably going through people's brains. What are unreasonable adjustments? What would be an unreasonable expectation from somebody for an employer to do in order for them to work? And Rick, I'm sorry to throw that one back at you again, but you know so much about this.
Yeah, no pressure, Julian. Thank you.
None at all.
Okay, so the whole concept of reasonable adjustments is quite specific to the individual. So there's no such thing as a checklist that says what you must do is this, this, and this, because it will depend on the nature of the job and the size and shape of the organization and all sorts of other things. So there's no easy way of doing this. But the concept is you need to think about costs, if it's going to cost too much, but that includes whether you can get support and help from other organizations like Job Centre Plus, Access to Work. And an adjustment can be absolutely anything. The test is it going to be costly? Is it going to be disruptive? Is it going to create health and safety issues? They're the tests pretty much. If the answer to that is no, we can find a way around it, it's a reasonable adjustment. If you genuinely can't find a solution to a problem, then that would be reasonable, but you'd have to demonstrate that. But I always think, look, think about this in a different way. Organizations make adjustments to everybody, for everybody in their organizations all of the time. They have all sorts of special things like carer leave, parent leave, compassionate leave, all of these things. They're not legal obligations. They do them because it's good for the workforce, it's good for individuals. Adjustments by a different name. That's how you think about adjustments for disabled people. This is about getting people to work at their maximum capacity and to best benefit and to achieve the outputs. That's it. Just think about doing it differently.
Okay, thank you. And Shaheen, you've already mentioned job shares and things like that you've put into place in order to help people. Rebecca Gill, if I could ask you with your specific needs, with your current employer, you don't have to mention their name, what adjustments have they made in order for you to deliver for them?
Yeah, my current employer, I think, has actually been probably the best and most adjusting employer I think I've actually ever had for my.
Listen, if you want to mention them, do. You don't.
Just be like CFCIPD. Yeah, no, they're great with me actually. We had a proper sit down conversation with like my head of studio to properly go over my disability and what adjustments I would need to help me fulfill my job to the best of my ability, and so that I would be comfortable and happy in the company, which as a starter was great for me. It was great to sit down and have that conversation with someone properly. But for me, we've made like a little plan for when we start going back to the office, that we'll never be going back for 5 days a week. For me, that I will have options and days that I can choose to work from home, which is great. We've also gone over like working hours, and also like if there is a day where I'm feeling a little bit off, if I'm having a little bit of a flare up, because it is so unexpected with my condition, especially with ME, I can be fine 1 second and then in 5 minutes a flare could just start out of nowhere. So like we have little catch ups like every few weeks where we sit down, how's everything going this week, everything okay? And the options even there that if I need like a little bit of a longer lunch break, or if I need a little break in the afternoon just for a snack or a quick nap, like that has been an option for me with this company. So accessibility wise, it's spot on for me. Yeah, I'm really happy. They've also offered me like different equipment and stuff too. Like sometimes if I start to get a little bit fatigued in the afternoon, there's software where I can then talk to my computer and it'll type up notes for me instead.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, it's been a very good experience.
And none of these seem, to me anyway, earth-shattering. It just requires that conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah, that conversation's a biggie, and I think people just need to feel comfortable about having that conversation and not just thinking, okay, disabled is just one thing. Like people, I think, need to understand and learn that disability for each person is unique and different. So there could be another person in the company that has ME too, but our accessibility needs could be the complete opposite from each other.
Okay. And you have mentioned to me in the past that you did go through one particular employment situation where you didn't declare your situation until after they'd given you the job, and then things began to change.
Yeah, I think even now, to be honest, I think it's still, well, I know myself, I get a bit anxious and a bit worried when I'm having an interview or if I'm starting a new job. And that first initial conversation of going, I'm disabled, is that okay? And I feel silly in myself sometimes even asking if that is okay, because it should be. Like there's no reason for it not to be okay, to be honest. I think it's just always a positive. But yeah, there has been times in the past where I didn't disclose because I was a bit too nervous to. I'd been working at a company for 2 weeks as a runner, and then I got offered another job, better job, moving on up as a production assistant, it would have been, and the contract got signed and everything, and then I disclosed my disability, thinking, oh, it's fine, the contract signed, this is probably a good time to bring it up. And this was right at the beginning of my career, so it was still very new for me, and I didn't know how to have these conversations with people then. But that didn't work out because the company ghosted me after that.
When you say ghosted you, what do you mean by that?
They just sort of cut all contact. I just was a bit like, okay, I've got my contract ready to go to work, and then I just sort of never heard anything else ever again. Everything disappeared. Didn't get told when to start work. I emailed, called, and didn't hear anything. Nobody would reply back to me. So it was a bit awkward. It definitely knocked my confidence because I was just out of university when that happened. So yeah.
I can imagine. I don't know what you do in that situation. I suppose there's the part of me that thinks, right, we'll sue them, but that doesn't really get you anywhere either, does it, long term?
Try not to let it knock your confidence and keep on going, because it paid off in the end.
Well, there you go. There you go. Rick,
sometimes, sorry to jump in, but sometimes third-party organizations can step in. And that's a lot of responsibility on you to negotiate this circumstance by yourself. So not that there's anything special about me, except that I'm willing to have these conversations. So I have called production offices and said, do you realize this individual has autism? And that's why that was an awkward conversation. Can you give them another opportunity to just come, turn up and do the job and not feel pressure to be sociable, which is a very difficult conversation for someone with autism to have. So I like my members at the Equal Access Network to trust me with some of that information. Obviously, I have to earn that trust. But yeah, sometimes someone else is better positioned to do that. And I don't know, Rick, aren't there HR departments at companies that should be helping to engage in these conversations?
Unfortunately, no, not really. Not many. Some of the charities will help, but they're so overloaded. And so it is quite difficult for individuals to get support. And I think one of the weaknesses of the legislation is that what happened to Rebecca, in my view, would be clearly illegal and a breach of the law. Unfortunately, the only way you can address that through the law is by Rebecca taking a case to an employment tribunal, and that is incredibly difficult, complex, and very stressful. And that's why there isn't that much case law. But yeah, that's clearly a breach. But then you have to ask yourself the question, do I want that level of grief, frankly? And I wouldn't blame anybody for not doing that. I mean, organizations like your, Rebecca, I think are brilliant in the fact that you can give that help, but very limited availability of personal advocate type support anywhere else.
But I think sometimes just calling institutions and organizations on these scenarios maybe is enough to start to realign some individuals' thinking. Yeah. Just going, okay, so someone's come to me and we need to discuss this because this put them in an uncomfortable position. And employers come to me regularly looking for recruitment support. So if I find a situation that I don't think was handled positively, I think they do care what I think because I'm bringing them more workforce. Can I just say something in response to something Rick said earlier as well that I feel is a positive winds of change? You pointed out an interesting way to look at it is companies have to make regular adjustments all the time when they recruit. And I think what's really happened with a positive outcome from the lockdown and COVID is companies are having to talk to their entire workforce now about what adjustments need to be made. Are you coming back to the office? Are you not coming back to the office? Do you have childcare? Do you not have childcare? So they're being forced to have these conversations. So now when I'm stepping up and having these conversations about people that have no childcare or who have to shelter with COVID or have disabilities, they're expecting to have these conversations. And like you said, it's just different adjustments. They're having to make adjustments already.
Do you think, go carry on.
I would just want to add to that. So that's a positive change, which I guess ironically we can thank the lockdown for, but also what's also happening, which is forcing the conversation and change, is the demand for workforce. So productivity now is beyond what we can supply. The demand is greater than the supply. So employers don't have their first choice. They have to make adjustments. They have to be open-minded and they have to have conversations with individuals. When they come to the Equal Access Network, they know that they're having to look outside the box slightly because we're bringing candidates to them who are either returning, that have been out of work, or they want to step up, or they want to step sideways into another industry. And so all of my conversations about, well, look at it this way, consider this, make this adjustment. And I actually find in the last year and a half, people are ready to have these conversations in a way that they weren't before.
No, you're right. It's ironic, isn't it, that the lockdown has actually created these positive things. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of people who've been working remotely, especially in animation studios, because animation hardly missed a beat when the lockdown happened. It was back to full capacity within 2 weeks, whereas the live action industry just ground to an almost immediate halt. And talking about sort of, everyone's been working from home and we're now hopefully going back into our office environments, our studios a little more often. There's going to be probably quite a lot of people who've got jobs in the lockdown who've maybe never met their teammates and stuff like that before. Rebecca Gill, do you think companies do enough, or in your experience, companies could do more about explaining an individual's personal circumstances and the adjustments that have been made in order for them to work to their full capacity to other people in the team? Because there could be a scenario, I suppose, if they didn't know, where they might think, oh well, they're hardly ever here, they're not really doing their work, they're always late, whatever it is. Do you think it's a good thing for it to be explained to everybody else in the company?
So I think two points really. So I think they probably got to be a little bit careful because confidential data at the end of the day. But I think as long as the person with the disability is happy for it to be disclosed to others, then I think it's probably a good conversation to have. Like in my experiences, I've always quite liked for HR probably not to tell people, and for me to be able to go and tell the people that I'm working with, so I can have a personal conversation with them. So I've done that at my new company. Like, I had the conversation with the head of production. She was the woman that interviewed me, so she knew from the get-go, which was great. And then in my own time, like after the sort of like, you know, initial shock of a new job and getting into the swing of things, I then went and had a conversation with like my producer, my production manager, the CG and 2D supervisors who I was going to be working with on a daily basis, and had just a quick little 10-15 minute chat with them, just so that they were aware, in the loop, and if they had any questions to ask me, they could fire away. And for me, that I thought that was very beneficial. Sometimes they still like pull me aside and double check on me and go like, oh, are you okay? I had that this week. My CG suit was like, how are you feeling? It's been a busy week. Are you okay? And it's nice because they sort of like check in on you. So it's nice. I think it makes it a little bit more personal, and it's definitely a good conversation to have. Yeah.
And Shaheen, would you agree that that's a careful explanation to some people that work with people with a disability is an important thing to do?
Yeah, but I do agree with Rebecca that it has to come from the individual, because if they don't want it discussed, that's completely up to them. I've only had one person who's really wanted to discuss it openly with everybody, and it was quite eye-opening actually, because I'd made some reasonable adjustments and stuff, but with different departments, there were other adjustments that came up in the topic of conversation that needed to be made. So it was nice. I did have one concern about it, that not everybody, luckily that production was lovely, but not every production has lovely people. It has a lot of stressed people on there. And when you're in a stressed situation, you're not thinking clearly, and also sometimes not very nicely. So I think that I completely understand where somebody would choose not to take that approach, because you can end up being judged by ignorant people to belong in a particular box. So yeah, it's a very, very careful line. You have to assess the climate that you're working in, which is really, really unfortunate. But there's always the option to go to somebody higher. And if somebody, because somebody higher can actually set that tone and just say, I would like to have this conversation with my colleagues. I'm not sure how I don't want to be judged as a problem. I just want to make them aware, and in case, you know, something happens or they think I'm. So, and then that person can set the tone and the climate and the atmosphere for the production.
It's interesting you say I'm a type 1 diabetic, and what I tend to do when I go into a new situation, I did this at Film London, is I have an email which I check with HR, and as long as they don't have a problem, I send it out to everybody in the company. And one of the reasons there's a couple of reasons why I send it around. One is that there are certain situations with a diabetic, if your blood sugars drop really, really low, you can pass out. So it's to make people aware that if that happens, this is what you do. But I always try and make it a bit jokey and things, because if your blood sugars get very high, you can become quite irritable, and my wife would say probably psychotic. But I said to them, look, if you find me with my hands around your throat and I'm trying to strangle you, you do feel free to say, are your blood sugars too high? Because it's probably nothing personal. I'm just in that sort of situation. And actually, my boss at Film London almost sent an email around to everybody saying, and if I have got my hands around your throat and I'm trying to throttle you, it has nothing to do with diabetes. But she didn't send it in the end. But I think you're right. It's about the individual, it's about the tone, setting the tone. And I think also probably if there is important health information in there, which is if your disability can lead to a situation where your health is at risk, or you could pass out, I think it's important for people around you to know that, so they're half expecting it. We're heading towards the end of the session now. We've only got 5 or 6 minutes to go, and I do want to play a short 3-minute video, which I think sort of encompasses an awful lot about what we've been saying today, which is, that disability comes in all forms. It's hidden, it's visible. Different people with the same condition can need different things. But overall, what we want to try and do is we want to encourage more people with disability to come into the animation sector. We want to reap the rewards of their talent and skills and their friendship in the workplace, and make our studios and our workplaces richer and more diverse on all levels. But if there was one sort of note, one sort of thought you would give to somebody who's maybe watching this and thinking, oh, I'd really like to get into animation, or I'd really like to apply for that job, but I'm just a bit reluctant. What bit of advice would you give them? Rebecca Baker, what would your advice be to that person?
Well, my advice to all my members, it's the same. Share with me where you're at and what you need, and I will help you have that conversation. And that also goes with people applying for a job but saying, I have this childcare need, or I have this accessibility need. If you can find someone like Legal Access Network that's there to help and support you, those conversations need to take place early on with someone you trust. Okay, thank you. Shaheen, how about you?
Well, I would use their desire to do something as a motivator. Like, it's really great to get people fired up about their dream, and then I would introduce them to people at Film London, Screen Skills, and some other charities and businesses and people who can help. So obviously, if I had the position, I would take them, but I also now have a much wider network of people who can help. So yeah, and I think Rebecca is even better than me at like cheerleading somebody into a job, and I think people, they need that fire, you know, they need permission to ignite that as well. I think
Okay.
that's actually a long way.
Thank you. Rebecca Gill?
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more, really. I think if you've got that passion for something, get that fire lit and go and do it. But also reaching out to the Equal Access Network, Screen Skills, like I've been through both of them. I was on the Equal Access Network in 2019, and that massively helped boost my confidence about talking about my disability and following my dreams, really. And Screen Skills helped me get an industry mentor, which really changed my career path, which was fantastic. So follow your dreams, go for it. Yeah, this is what's holding you back.
Good for you. And Rick?
Yeah, can I have two? I'd like to go one for the employer and one for the employee.
Absolutely.
If you're looking for a job, you've got a disability, don't be timid. No one's going to do this for you. You get help and support, but I'd hate you to look back in 10 years' time and think, oh, I wish I'd done that differently, or I wish I'd. You will get knockbacks. Ignore them, move on. And don't give in. If someone's hostile and doesn't want to employ you, that's their loss, and you don't want to work for them anyway. Go and find someone else. There are people out there that will give you a job. From employers, don't think in stereotypes. Interestingly, Julian, I didn't know you had diabetes. Under the law, that's probably a disability. Would you ever describe yourself as disabled? Would an employer describe you as disabled? Probably
I've never
not.
described myself as disabled, no.
There we are. So there's a whole sort of thing around the terminology we use that pushes buttons. Ignore it. Think about the individual, what you're trying to do, and what the outputs are you need for the job. Match the two, make adjustments. It's not that hard. All the research says it's not hard, it's not expensive, and there's loads of business benefits.
Brilliant. Thank you all. I'm going to play this 3-minute thing. Please tell me if you can see it and if you can hear it. Rick, thank you for that smile. Then we'll come back and quickly say goodbye. So let me see if I can do a bit of a share screen. Oh, see, I told you I couldn't do it. Oh, bugger. Right, where are we? Share screen, share screen, share screen. I am share screen. I wish I could get this to work. One moment, please, caller. Here we go.
Imagine if everyone in your life who has a disability suddenly just disappeared. Oops, there go the 10% dyslexic, the 13% hearing impaired, the 10% with sight loss, diabetes, arthritis, learning disabilities, depression, facial disfigurement, dementia and stroke, asthma, speech impairment, wheelchair users, autism, sclerosis, migraines, anxiety, cell, amputation, brain damage, cerebral palsy, RSI, epilepsy, muscular dystrophy. Before we know it, there'd be no one left. there are more than 1 billion people with disabilities worldwide, and the number is growing. Yet how many of us, when we hear this word disability, automatically click to the old assumptions? Nothing to do with me. It's just a few wheelchair users, blind people, dogs. Doctors and charities take care of them. When actually the experience of disability, the unfairness and disadvantage that it brings, is very much about me. In fact, about all of us. About our experience as we go through life, and about getting older, which most of us would like to do. Actually, we all know human perfection is rare. Why bother with the Olympics if everyone can do a 3-minute mile? The real problem is our sad tendency to make assumptions about each other on the basis of labels. How we ourselves expect to be treated is changing as we recognize that we all have a basic right to respect, dignity, and choice. We need to replace the unacceptable old focus on medical labels with the new focus on individual potential, dignity, and human rights. The old brain makes assumptions. Everyone just knows that blind people can't use the internet. The new brain asks, how could this talented blind researcher do this job if we were clever? Simply put, impairment is what happens to you. Disability is what we do to you. Refuse the ramp. Refuse flexi time. Insist you apply online, even though the technology won't let you. Refuse to let you use a different keyboard. Assume you are just not worth the bother. That old click comes through especially loud and clear when you hear the traditional challenge. So what is the business case for hiring disabled people? But just think, nobody asks, what is the business case for hiring, say, Canadians? Everyone knows some can do the job, some can't, some have the talent, some don't, some need adjustments, some do not. We don't generalize about 35 million people labeled Canadians. Why on earth do we still generalize about more than 1 billion people labeled disabled? And yes, I am Canadian. And listen hard to the disabled graduate's new brain reaction. Why do you need a business case for treating me properly? Business Disability International wants to start a brand new conversation which drives a global revolution as disabled and not yet disabled come together to ask, how do we replace the old brain with the new? And in case you're wondering who this Canadian is, I'm Susan Scott Parker, Chief Executive of Business Disability International.
That's brilliant, Julian.
Well, it's not it was actually Rick sent it to me. It's something that Rick uses when he does his sessions, which I can highly recommend. They are brilliant. But I think that encompasses it all very well. And I'd like to thank Rick for passing that on to me.
And anyone can use that and download it off the website. So it's free to use. Please do.
And yeah, if anybody wants to use that or any other information about what we've been discussing, if you can get in touch with me via the London International Animation Festival through NAG, or and I'm sure he'll pass the request on to me, and I'll tell you where to get hold of that information. Anyway, thank you very much. We've overrun ever so slightly, but I would really like to thank Shaheen, Rebecca, Rick, and Rebecca for giving up their Saturday afternoon, and thank you out there, people who have been listening to us, for taking the time to listen to us. Have a great afternoon. Cheerio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.